I feel like I'm in a nightmare, but I can't wake up.
Hey, you guys. Welcome to the Unrefined Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon, accompanied by my bros, Lindsay and BT. Thanks for joining us for another episode as we unravel mysteries, share perspectives, and navigate the rich landscapes of the seen and the unseen. Hey, guys.
Hey, man.
Our guest today is Patrick Meechan. He is an author, researcher, deliverance minister, filmmaker, and podcaster. These are true to real-life stories of Christian spiritual warfare, exorcism, and the paranormal. Patrick is also the host of Stranger Than Fiction podcast. Welcome so much, Patrick.
Thank you for having me on.
We're going to be talking about your two books. Can you give us the names of those two books, please?
Yes, the first one is Nightmare in Holmes County, and it documents my first of two consecutive yet unrelated haunted houses. And then I went right from that situation in real life. The very next house I moved into after that became the book 225th Street. And that both houses, again, the hauntings were completely unrelated and different in the origins of the haunting. So there was a slightly different feel between the two houses. But to experience something like that, there had to be a reason for it. And I also knew that when you go through those experiences, it's life and death. There's situations you can die. And I felt like, when you're trapped, Nightmare in Holmes County, where I got that title was many times while I was trapped in that situation, it seemed like it was never going to end. I would say, I feel like I'm in a nightmare, but I can't wake up. And so that's what became the title. And when you're in that environment, it's horrible. So I thought, if I experienced this and I came out on the other side, then I need to share that with other people. So number one, they'll have a perspective on what causes haunting, because there's an awful lot of misinformation in the paranormal community and on TV and everything. I mean, what their view is completely unbiblical. So I wanted to share my experiences, but also point people back to the source of the deliverance. So that's kind of what both books are about.
Yeah. Let me explain this a little bit to everybody out there. Patrick's first book is his second haunting, and his second book is the first experience he had, which was in Holmes County. And so it's like I'm reading Nightmare in Holmes County, and I'm just like, through the whole book, I'm like, oh my gosh, can something possibly else go wrong? I mean, gee whiz, it's like constant nonstop.
Yeah.
And I was like, and then something else. And then so, I mean, it's like I was feeling viscerally in there. I was like, this poor dude, man. I'm like, what's up? Through the whole book. I felt that more in Nightmare than I did in 220. I think it's because 220, you never really moved in, so to speak. Did you? I mean, you did, but you didn't.
I moved in, and I was in the process of buying the house. A realtor had bought it and was flipping it.
Yeah.
And I moved in, and he said, hey, when they get your mortgage all straightened out, he said, we'll settle then. And he said, go ahead and move in so you don't have to move all your belongings twice, which was very nice of him to say that, Who wants to move twice when you can move once? But so I was living there, and things began happening. And then one of my neighbors came over and told me some things, and I was like, I knew it. What in the world? Here I am again. And basically, I came to the conclusion, we attempted an exorcism on that house. It did not work. And when that happens, that means simply there's something that needs to be dealt with. It is a legal right where a door was opened, and you need to deal with that. And I came to the conclusion, I think enough time I could deal with that. But every day I'm going to be thinking about, when I walk through my house and walk down my stairs, I'm going to be thinking about the in 1958, a gentleman walked that same path with a rifle in his hand, went to the basement and shot himself. I'm always going to be thinking about that. And I don't want to, I don't want to live in that environment. That's why I backed out. So I was only there 3 months, and I told the realtor, I said, I'll buy another house you have listed, but I'm not buying this house. And I said, legally, you have to let me out of this, because there was a suicide, you did not disclose that to me, and there
Right.
were reports that it was haunted, and you didn't." He said, "Well, I didn't know about that." And I said, "Nevertheless, whether he did or didn't, I can't prove." He said he didn't. Nevertheless, I was like, I'm not gonna live in that environment, you know? So it was a 3-month period, and a lot of 225th Street is not only my experiences in that house during that time, but it's my, like, in-depth investigation of the history of the haunting. So it's
Yeah.
almost like detective work. You're going back in and you're tracking down what happened, who did what, and, so it's a story that shares multiple families' perspective on what they experienced in that house over multiple decades. Um, Nightmare in Holmes County is my experiences. Period. It is my time in that house after we bought the property and had the house built, and it did it. You said it exactly right. It felt like it can't get worse. It's like every day it gets worse.
Yeah.
And it is literally, it was like a nightmare that but I cannot wake up from this, you know? It was terrible. And, that's exactly what it was like living there. And, you know, I was a little bit hesitant. I did originally write 225th Street first because I was living in 225th Street, writing Nightmare in Holmes County. I had gotten delivered from that
Wow.
terrible situation in Holmes County, and I moved into this other house, and I thought, "God delivered me. I need to share this." And I'm
Mm.
working on that book, but weird things keep happening in the new house.
Mm.
And I ended up, when I found out exactly what was going on, and that there was a history of a haunting there, I
Right.
knew immediately. And it's hard to explain. I felt like God downloaded this to my mind. I knew
Yeah.
immediately Nightmare in Holmes County has to go on the back burner. This book has to be done first. You have to put all your energy into this research. And the title is to be 225th Street. I
Mm.
knew the title was to be the real address, and that's why it was written first. And then Nightmare in Holmes County was released. The original edition of 225th Street was 2011. Nightmare in Holmes County, I believe, was 2015. Um, and or it could have been 2016. Time passes. And yeah, I think it was 2015. But anyway, and as I was writing Nightmare in Holmes County, I was hesitant. Do I really want to share how bad it was? Because am I going to bog down the reader and make them depressed where they can't even stand to finish the book? And a young lady I worked with that was an intelligent individual, we were talking about it one day, and I said, "I just don't know if it's a good idea to share all this." And she said, "You have to." And at that point, it was like, okay, I needed to hear that. I needed somebody to tell me that. And I accepted at that point, okay, if you want people to understand the magnitude of the deliverance, you have to take them to the really bad places before the deliverance happened. So that's what I did.
Yeah, Patrick, I always appreciate, not because I love hearing people's misery, but just because just someone sharing something that personal. I mean, particularly your marriage ended, and that man, that couldn't have been easy to share. And yeah, I appreciated that. It was difficult to read, but yeah, on another level, I always appreciate people being willing to share those experiences with people. And yeah,
Yeah, it's not always easy being that transparent about stuff that personal, but at the
yeah,
same time, I was like,
yeah,
you have to understand where I was at and what I was going through. And
yeah.
the other thing about it is, a lot of times, a lot of Christians will say, "Well, the devil can't attack Christians. The devil can't do this. The devil can't do that." And the devil has a really, really unique way of getting the right to attack Christians. Number one, as in the case of Job, sometimes it's allowed by God, so we will be tested. That does happen. The other thing is, what he will do is he will put roadblocks in front of you to get you to slip up. So now the attacks can happen because he's got a right to attack you because you screwed up. And in
Yeah.
my case, going through that divorce, I was an emotional wreck. You know, I was. And then you, without even realizing it, you're dealing with anger issues. You're dealing with, just being very depressed and feeling bad, and unforgiveness. And it wasn't, I forgave my ex-wife. I forgave her. That was the easy part. It was the ongoing onslaught from my neighbors and the Amish
Mm,
people that was where the unforgiveness came in. Because I'm not a person who I don't mess with other people. I respect them. I respect their property. I leave them alone and mind my own business. When
Yeah.
somebody persistently wants to mess with me, I get to a point where it's like, okay, I turned the other cheek here and you are continuing, so we're going to have it out. And it's one of those things where it's like that's dangerous because now you can be in a place where your heart's not right. You want to smash somebody. Your heart is not right,
Right.
and even though in a worldly sense it's justifiable, at the same time you're spiritually open to all the attacks, and it played right into the situation of the people around me in that area.
Hmm. Well, like before we get into the Holmes County and a lot of the Amish type stuff, I do have a particular question. Is there any supernatural, particularly chilling event that you had in at 220 that maybe wasn't in the book, or that was of the things in the book that were the most like, oh my gosh, that it just really. I know you'd already been through Holmes County,
Yeah,
so nothing probably surprised you. But was there anything in the 220 house that just like blew you away?
there's things to this day. And now I have to say, these books were all released as second editions in 2021.
Yeah.
A company called Beyond the Fray Publishing contacted me and they said, "Hey, we want to republish your books if you're interested." And I said, "I am, but I think I need to expand them and there needs to be things added
Right.
because there's a lot more information now since that time, time has passed." And they said, "Okay, we agree. You need to do that." So I did. And I went back and I researched again and I included really, really strange things that have continued to happen. And I included those things. So some of it I can't, I would need to write a third edition because the things have continued. And I think it's just a cycle that continues. Um, but as far as things that I didn't include, for the most part, all the things that were just absolutely terrifying that happened there, they're in the book. But
Okay.
I've had experiences. I will just tell you when you write about these things, and your
Hmm.
focus is not just scaring people, but hey, I'm going to tell you the whole story, and I'm going to tell you the good side too, and I'm going to
Right.
expose the enemy, meaning the devil and demons. They don't like that. The demons do not like that. They do not like because if people if they actually really get it in their mind what hauntings are and how to have authority over them, then they're in jeopardy. So they don't like that. They don't just take it that you're going to share the truth. So they attack, and you will have paranormal experiences. A lot of those are shared into 25th Street, things that happened while I was writing the book. But I will tell you, the very day, and I have multiple books in the works, believe me, because I've had other experiences. Uh, but the very day that I was contacted by Beyond the Fray, and they told me we want to republish your books. I was at
Hmm.
work, and where I worked at that time, that's going to be another book, and it is over the top. It is going to blow people's minds what I have to share, and I mean, it's mind-boggling to me even after all these experiences I have had. But I'm standing in this back hallway, and I worked at a hospital, okay, and
Hmm.
I was a supervisor in security. And I'm in this back hallway that goes through an old surgery unit that's back behind where the security department was. And I'm coming down this hallway, and my phone dinged, and I stopped, and I'm looking at the message, and we start talking. I'm talking to the owners of that company, and I said, "Yeah, I'm interested, but I think it needs to it needs to be updated and expanded, blah blah blah." And as I'm texting them, and there's an empty room, a big empty room, and all the lights are out in the room at the end of that hallway. And I start hearing all these noises coming from that room. And it sounds like somebody has a hold of something like substantial size and weight, and they're shaking it real hard. And it's coming from that room. I glance up at the room, and I'm like, somebody's in there with the lights out. I don't know why, but whatever. And at that time, the custodians kept some of their equipment in there. So I was like, okay, somebody's in there messing with something, and it's pretty loud what I'm hearing. I sent my message. I walked down, and this room was probably about 30 feet or less from where I was standing. I Sent my messages, walked down the hallway, walked into that room, and it was completely empty. And I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? As I'm even talking about doing a second edition and reinvestigating and adding new information, already that's paranormal.
Hmm.
Already I'm having experiences. And that's kind of how it is. When you write about it, you will experience attacks spiritually and everything.
Yeah, it's really interesting because part of the ministry that Lindsay and I do is something called DMM. It's a disciple making movements where we try to go into areas and we make disciples, and then we start little groups of disciples, and then we hopefully they grow into churches from
Hmm.
that. But one of the things that we're taught primarily, and it's an often overlooked scripture that Jesus actually taught the disciples to do this before he died, and we it's just a recovery of that. And but he said that when you went in to an area, you needed to find the strong man, and you needed to bind the strong man,
Yep.
and then and so what we've noticed in our ministry, and it usually manifests itself through a person, but it doesn't always.
Hmm.
Um, is like businesses and houses and families and all this always have some sort of a strong man over them
Yep.
that's like controlling or calling the shots. For an example, we went into an apartment complex and I asked some of the kids that were out playing, it's like, who's the person in here that you're scared of the most that gives you the creeps, like willies and all da 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 da. And what they all knew the same one person down the apartment. The interesting thing is where their apartment was located was where they could see the whole complex and know what was going on, and
Hmm.
it's just all this it's just really bizarre stuff. But, they're inhabited by the strong man that is actually what we've encountered is if you get rid of the strong man, if you bind the strong man when you're doing this, a lot of times you go back in and do evangelism and discipleship, and it's like open heaven,
Yep.
just from getting rid of that. And that's what you just told me about the hospital, and that reminds me of even like teams and businesses. Like you have a group of 10 people in a team, and one of them is the strong man. One of them is the it might even not even be the one that's in charge,
Yeah.
and so that reminds me a lot of what you're talking about, how there is specific spirits that are the spirit in their hierarchy to control a certain area or a certain, situation or whatever. Have you ever encountered that before?
Many times.
Yeah,
Many times, and, when you talk about I always say the devil has multiple ways to attack, and one is through the paranormal, through supernatural means, and then the
right.
other way is through people who are not submitted to the lordship of Jesus Christ. So those people can be used against us when we're trying to fulfill the Great Commission. So I've experienced it many times. And one thing that I experience a lot when I see that is, and you are right, sometimes it's the person in charge, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a tandem. But one thing I see over and over and over is the one demon I see often used in those situations is Jezebel,
Yeah.
because Jezebel wants to be in control. And when you have a Jezebel Ahab situation, and this is my opinion, but I always say this, I believe it wholeheartedly. It is a
Mhm.
spiritual law that Ahab will never go against Jezebel. Ahab will protect Jezebel. And I've seen that a lot at that tandem at work, and it happens a lot. But that's one thing that'll be in the book about the hospital will be there was multiple forces at work there. It was a Catholic hospital, and there were other forces at work too that I ended up connecting later on. But the stuff I have to share about that, I'm just telling you, people will think they'll think I'm crazy, but it's all true. And they're absolutely though, you are right. There is a strong man. And the other thing is, I've had people say, "Oh, what's he talking about binding demons? That's blah blah blah." He doesn't know what he's really. Jesus talked about binding the strong man in relation to demons. And that's the thing. When you go in there, you're binding that spirit that is the one that is hindering spiritual growth of the other people and all those things. That's a good thing to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. There's many different, meanings to the whole concept of bonding and loosing,
Hmm.
but I definitely, have learned in anecdotally, but also biblically that there is a place for the binding and loosing of spirits.
Yes.
stuff
Yes.
like
And
that.
Jesus called that the keys to the kingdom. He said, I've given you the keys to the kingdom, and what you bind on earth is bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. So he's given us that. And what I believe that means is when you do it, there's agreement in heaven when you do it.
Mhm.
Heaven's agreeing with you. So there's going to be spiritual
Mhm.
assistance, if that's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
I've thought sometimes, what actually happens when you bind demons? I wonder what actually is happening. And I've thought different times, like, is it an angel comes and literally
Yeah.
binds that? Whatever it is, they don't like it,
Right.
and it does work.
Yeah, it's restriction. That's what I've
Yeah.
always.
Yes.
It's restriction.
Yes.
Yeah, and Christians in general don't realize the authority they have as the believer. That's a huge part of it. John McMillan, a Christian Missionary Alliance guys,
Hmm.
one of the first books, Authority of the Believer, that I cut my teeth on like 20 some odd years ago. And it really opened my eyes into not only loosing, luo, and binding. I forget the Greek word for binding. I think it's, anybody know the Greek word for bond?
I'm not
Anyway,
sure.
it doesn't matter. What those do are they're permission and restriction, and it's amazing to me um, how that works when it's enacted by faith. I mean that's a
Right.
crucial aspect as well as you have to believe it's going to work, or
That's
it's
right.
almost like spirits can smell. And this is what I call shade tree theology. I have here. I can't biblically bear this out, but it's just what I believe. I believe that there's such thing as spiritual pheromones, and I think that demons can sense fear and they can sense faith. And it's almost like in the spirit world, we secrete some sort of a pheromone type substance that lets them know. And it's like you have the example in the book of Acts, the sons of Sceva, in the name of Paul's God, and then beat the stew out of them and chased them
Yeah.
away naked. Well, I mean, they knew that there was no faith there, that it was just a
Yeah.
magic incantation.
Yep.
And so that's my kind of shade tree theology there or whatever. But I want to move into something we're really interested about, and we can talk about Nightmare in Holmes County as we're doing it because I mean that's basically what it's all about.
Yes.
All right, talk to us about the Amish. These are these gentle people who ride in buggies and make quilts and love everybody and forgive everybody when there's a shooting, and there's just all this front out there.
Hmm.
And I know what we're about to say is not every Amish. Okay, I realize that,
Right.
but the pervasiveness, because I did a little research too, the
Mhm.
pervasiveness of it is incredible,
Mhm.
and it
Yes.
blew me away. So tell us about it, Patrick.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to say this. This is my opinion, but if you follow the very definition, the Amish religion is a cult,
Mm.
Hmm.
and
Mhm.
they are not a Christian cult. They're not. I mean, here's the thing: they use elements of the Bible, but
Right.
they also use elements of all sorts of witchcraft, and not just witchcraft, but full on Satanism. Okay.
Mm.
If you watch the video trailer I have on YouTube for Nightmare in Holmes County,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah,
a
I believe it.
teaser, but
Mhm.
I take you to a valley in the middle of nowhere in Holmes County that's all Amish owned, and it is where all kinds of satanic rituals happened. And there's video proof of that area and what went on there. And it took me a little while to get my mind around it, but here's the bottom line. Okay, right on the surface, if you believe you have to ride in a wagon, not wear deodorant, you can't have a phone in your house, all these, if you think that's how you get to heaven, you don't understand Christianity at all.
Mm. Mm.
And the thing is, you'll see certain earmarks in every cult, and one is abuse of women, abuse of animals, and abuse of children,
Mm.
along with all kinds of false demonic doctrine. But that is exactly what you see in the Amish religion. And I had people that had left the Amish religion that told me, yeah, we were taught witchcraft in the church. And more of this is coming out. The other thing is they are over the top child molesters. There is so much inbreeding and you know, I had a lady that I used to work with. She was a nurse, and she lived in Holmes County. She had grown up in Holmes County, and we were talking one day, and she said, yeah, I believe everything you're saying." She said, "I lived there," and this was her exact words. She said the average Amish girl's first baby is to her dad or her brother. And there's so much of that that goes on, and people don't want to hear that. They don't want to believe it. It's like, okay, and I'm going to be honest, it irks me when supposedly devout Christians don't like what I'm saying and they act, oh, that's judgmental, that's wrong. Oh, no, it's the truth. I'm sorry you can't handle the truth, but it's the truth. And again, if you don't question their religion right off the bat because they think they have to do all these things or they can't go to heaven, then you don't understand Christianity either. Because that is straight up. They don't understand grace and they don't like it. They don't like when people believe it. They don't like that. That's against what they believe.
Well, what really stuck out to me about a lot of the Amish, and this was even before you were on my radar, even before I was podcasting years ago, is it's just the sheer hypocrisy of like, I can't own a phone, but I can go down to a phone booth and use the telephone to call somebody.
Yep.
And it just smacked Phariseeism to me totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and the whole jumping room springer thing where when you turn a certain age, they turn a blind eye to just whatever for a little while. That's always seemed funny to me.
Yeah, and it's over the top. I had people that I knew that told me they used to be partiers. They were not Christians, and they said the Amish are worse partiers than any of us because they went to parties where they were that were the Amish, younger Amish people that were thinking about jumping the fence, and that means leaving the Amish religion. But they said they use drugs like crazy. They're whoremongers. They're over the top, like really messed up sexual stuff.
Yep.
And that's who they really are. You know, I just saw a guy recently. I'm driving. I pass an Amish buggy, and the guy's talking on a cell phone in his Amish buggy. I'm like, but you think? I'm shaking my head like, what in the world? But the things they are really into. On my Stranger Than Fiction podcast, I interviewed a woman who left the Amish religion, and she is now helping other people, especially women, get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very reserved. She's a very reserved person, but she, as I started asking questions, she started opening up more. And the one thing was I talked about the books of Moses. And because there's one book that they'll deny this, but I've heard it and I believe it. And I have a copy of this book I will not even keep in my house. It's in a safety deposit box at a bank because I don't want it in my house, but I had it for research purposes. And that book is a couple 100-year-old book that talks about white witchcraft. And they all think, well, powwow is a harmless form of witchcraft. It's okay. Powwowers are okay. All this, okay. One of the passages in the book says if somebody has epilepsy, to cut a dove's throat and drink the blood and you will be healed. It's all kinds of these weird things like that. And I got to tell you this, years ago, many years, I hadn't even written Nightmare in Holmes County yet. And I was on I was doing an interview on a paranormal show. And they asked me, I was being interviewed about 225th Street, but they asked me a little bit about the situation in Holmes County. And I just briefly touched on it. And the one host, he says, right before we go to a commercial break, he said, I know where you're going with this. That's his exact words. And I thought, sure he does. We went to a commercial break and I said, hey, Lon, where do you think I'm going with this? And he said, you had a powwower working on you, buddy. I said, how did you know that? And he said, my family was Amish.
Yeah.
And he said, the first thing when you started talking, he said, I knew it. Somebody had a powwower. That's a witch working on you.
Shaman. Yeah.
He straight up said it. So you got all that, but then there's another book that's more secretive. It's the books of Moses. I don't remember the exact numbers they use. It's 7th and 8th or something. I can't remember. But those books, I downloaded copies of them onto an old laptop I had. And it is straight up. They come from Mesopotamia, like thousands of years old. And the idea was that Moses wasn't a prophet of God. Moses was a necromancer and a conjurer. Right. And these are his books. And this will teach you how to have power. And it's all about conjuring demons. So I mentioned this when I'm interviewing this lady that left the Amish religion, and when I mentioned those books, she said, "Yeah, that was required reading. I was told to read those." So she
That's
just admitted it that they made when you're growing up, they make you read that. How is that Christian?
it's not.
It,
It's
yeah,
not.
it's extremely demonic. And uh, when I started, when I'm in Holmes County, I'm like, what in the world is going on? Because at first, you build a house on a beautiful piece of land, and you start having things happening in the house that you can't explain, and you're like, what in the world is going on here? How can the house be haunted? It's new. And there was a bigger issue than even the Amish practicing witchcraft directly against me, which was happening. But there was a bigger issue too that had to do with the land we built the house on. But just the dealing with the spiritual warfare combating witchcraft, because what they would do, they know what they're doing. Okay, well, we want this curse to work because we really want this guy to lose everything so we get that property. We want that property in that house, but we don't want to buy it because we own him. We own Holmes County. We want him to lose everything, so we just come by and snatch it up for nothing. So we're going to curse him, but we know he's a Christian. So what we're going to do is we're just going to keep agitating him. We're going to trespass on his land. We're going to provoke him. He's somebody that will not back down, and he will address us, and if it comes to a fight, he will fight and he's not afraid. So we're going to provoke all that. That's what we're going to do, because when we do that, now all the witchcraft is going to work, because he's not right with God, because he's teeter-tottering, he's given over to anger, we know he went through a divorce, he's an emotional wreck. We're going to use this against him, and that's exactly what they did. And there, when you talked about, yeah, can it get any, when you're reading a book, you're thinking, can it get worse?
Yeah.
It's stories of this, the things that went on over and over to provoke me, or just to straight up mess with me. Done by them a lot, in the local people in the community. It was a very difficult situation. And the right thing to do would be act like a sanctified believer and turn the other cheek. But it was like, man, I was so pushed my back against the wall that it was like, I'm not. I feel like I need to defend myself here. And there's one account where I had somebody try to run me off the road, and I pulled over at a gas station, and it's just an example again of their hypocrisy. There's a work truck full, driven by a probably Mennonite, because they're allowed to drive cars. He's the driver, and then it's full of all these Amish guys. And this kid ran me off the road. He was a Mennonite. He tried to anyway. Tried to run me off the road. He was a Mennonite driving a car. And I pull over to guys, and they're going berserk, trying to provoke me. And here's the bad. I felt like I just gave over to it. And like I walked up to their truck. They were cussing at me. Their language was disgusting. And I said very calmly, I said, "Oh, that's really scary. You know how to cuss." I said, "Now, if you want to back up your mouth, get out of the truck. All of you, get out of the truck and let's go." And I wasn't even going to like start fist fighting. I was going to hurt them, because growing up, my dad was in the army during Vietnam. He learned how to kill people with his hands. And he said, "I'm going to teach you kids, if your life is in danger, I'm going to teach you how to fight so you can survive." And that's how he raised us. He also taught us to box. He taught us all kinds of stuff like that. But I was like, no, I'm outnumbered. This is going to be a really bad situation. And I stayed real calm. But what I felt inside, I gave over to something I shouldn't have. And they backed down. All of them backed down. But you know what they did then? I would go home from work, and they would have torn up my property when I was at work, destroyed all the realtor signs, drove Amish buggies all through my yard while their horse was defecating all through my yard while I'm trying to sell the house. So there's a whole other side to them. And the thing is, like, yeah, the right thing for me to do would have been turn the other cheek. And they knew that. And they knew by provoking me, well, when we do that, then the witchcraft's going to work.
Well, if you're anything like me, sometimes I'm kind of unrefined, and the cheek I want to turn is not the one on my face. So, but anyway, it seems like to me you were like, and we live in the South. Lindsay and I do. BT lives
Mhm.
up in Oregon, But
Mhm.
we live right near one of the major Civil War battles that they basically lost the war for the Confederacy. It's Vicksburg.
Okay.
And, what Grant's strategy there was a war of attrition, and it seems like to me that that is one of the enemy's biggest weapons is attrition. It's not big blows that he does. It's
Mhm.
these little small, like death by a thousand cuts.
Yep.
And and as he does those death by a thousand cuts, he knows how to stir our souls into sin.
Yep.
And then he, like you said, the door is cracked, and then we open it up, and he can come on in. And
Yes.
and that's what I felt like when I was reading your book. I was like, oh my gosh, man, this guy's under siege.
Yeah. It was not a pleasant experience, and thank God, God brought me through it. And, it took a time where God and I looking back, I can see it very clearly. There were things he wanted me to do to basically show I'm submitting to you, God. I'm submitting. I'm going to turn the other cheek. And one of those happened in a situation where one of the people who had done the most terrible things to me, I ran into him and I just felt overwhelmed. Like, man, I don't want this guy to go to hell. And that story shared in the
Mhm.
book, but I was like, I don't want him to go to
Yeah,
hell.
yeah.
And I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, I apologize to you for anything that I have done to you." And I hadn't like gone out and done things to him, but like I didn't handle the things he did to me very well. And I said, "If I've offended you, I apologize. I apologize for offending you." And I said, "And I forgive you for anything you've done to me." And it was like you could see a weight lift off of his shoulders. And he said, you could just see the relief. And he said, "You know what? You're right. We all have to live here. You're right." And he said, "I forgive you too." And it was like that was a huge step in the right direction that needed to happen spiritually.
Mm.
Then God brought me through a place where, he wanted me to give to a ministry. And I don't think it was about just that ministry. It was about, okay, are you going to trust me? Are you going to trust me when you're hurting financially that I can meet all your needs? And I was faithful and I did it. And everything that I felt he told me he was going to do, he did. And then I went through a period and I'm not a person that fasts. I don't do well with fasting. But I did. I fasted during that time, and I felt like, and it was all in 2009, and towards the end of the second half of the year, like
Mhm.
midsummer on roughly. But I can look back and see doors opening
Mm.
as I did those things, and he led me into where he wanted me to be. And then I learned what the secret was behind the haunting, and I was put in a position where me and two other believers were able to do spiritual warfare on the property and came out completely victorious. And I'm saying all that like again, like some of the paranormal that happened there was so unnerving.
Mm.
It's really it messes with your head. Like I'll give you an example. During that time, I was studying spiritual warfare and deliverance ministry from any source I thought could help me. If it was somebody that was into exorcism, I would at least listen to what they had to say and kind of take it all and put it in my toolbox. And there was
Right.
multiple ministers, things like that that I followed and just listened to what they talked about. I started like coming into contact with people that had demons and they wanted deliverance. And it's a very strange thing when you actually engage in that and you cast demons out of somebody. And then when you've experienced that, you can never go back to how you thought before you did that. It's a different thing. Your spiritual eyes are opened differently than they were before that. And I would go back home and I would be like, I mean, honestly, many nights I slept on my back with a Bible open on my chest because I was like, I'm in an environment that's so demonic. I just cast demons out of somebody. So can you imagine how bad these demons hate me even worse now? And I'm here. And why can't I cast them out of my house? Why can't
Mm.
I cast them out of my house, but I can cast them out of a person? And it was very, I don't want to say intimidating, but it was just like a mind game. They were messing with my head and they would show, we're here, we're still here. And it really messed with me up till the point it came down to, and this is how it is generally with deliverance. You have to find out where the door got opened, and that's what you got to deal with. And sometimes that is the whole thing you have to learn. And it's funny, if you go back into the book of Genesis, when Cain killed Abel, and before Cain killed Abel, they brought offerings to God, and Cain's offering was not, I believe he did not bring the first fruits, so to speak. He brought the leftovers. And God knew he did. And God rejected his offering. And he said to him, and Cain was angry. And God said to him, "Why has your countenance fallen?" And then he told him, he said, "I would have accepted it if you were obedient," basically is what God was telling Cain. If you were obedient, I would have accepted your offering. But he said, but sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you are to roll over it. So God in Genesis, right off the bat, the first book of the Bible, God tells us there is a door. There is a door, and sin lies on the other side of the door, and we are to be the one who controls the door. And when you open that door and you let Satan in, and as the story goes, Cain then did not listen to God, and he went out and killed Abel. And then he brought a curse on himself and his offspring, whatever. That's what happens. That door gets open, demons come in, and sometimes you got to get back to, like on a case of a property, okay, what was the thing that opened this property or this house to demons having a right to be here? When you have an actual infestation, something happened. And that's what I had to find out. And that's what we dealt with them once I learned that. And to me, it was even like God's hand in the whole situation, leading me to find out what I was dealing with, what had happened on the land, what was going on there. But some of the experiences in that house leading up to that, like it was like I saw black masses. I saw them in my reflection. They were behind me. I saw them in my reflection in a window one night, late at night. I saw them pass right through the room. Another time, and when I saw that, not only did I see it out of the corner of my right eye, my cats were sitting just off to my left, Moses and Zoe, my two cats, and their heads followed the trajectory of the black mass I saw pass through the room. They saw it just like I saw it. Knocks on doors when nobody's there, the doorbell ringing, nobody's there. You know, all these situations, many paranormal experiences, and it was terrifying at times. I'm fortunate in it, thank God, that I do believe in the Bible and I do believe in Jesus, because when I was terrified, my natural reaction is, this isn't about fighting in physical strength. This is spiritual. And I would immediately start binding demons and all things like that. But there was one incident that it was so terrifying. When I started trying to bind the demons, nothing would come out. I was like trying to yell, like very forcefully say, "I bind you in Jesus' name." And all that was coming out was a whisper. I was so scared, I couldn't get anything to come out but a whisper. And it was like, again, like being in a nightmare and you're trying to fight and you can't move. You're trying to pray and nothing will come out. But I wasn't sleeping. I was wide awake. I had many just absolutely terrifying experiences, but that is all part of life. The spirit realm is real, but God's given us authority and power, and you have to exercise that. In reality, being a Christian is a lot like being a police officer, because we are commissioned. A police officer, he's commissioned, and he has power and he has authority. He has authority as a police officer to enforce the law. And he also has a gun, he has a taser, he has a retractable wand. He's been trained to fight. He has the power to back his authority. And that's, as a Christian, as a believer, so do we. We were commissioned by Jesus Christ in Mark 16:17. He gave the Great Commission, and this applies to all believers. Everyone who believes and is baptized has this authority. And a baptism is an outward showing of obedience that, hey, I've turned from my old life and I'm following Christ. But he wants us to do that. And we have authority then. And the very first thing Jesus said in the Great Commission, he said, "Go to the ends of the earth and preach the gospel to every creature." He said, those who believe not shall be damned, but those who believe and are baptized, they will be saved. And he said, these signs will follow those who believe. The very first sign is, in my name they shall cast out devils. So we have that. We are commissioned by Jesus, and we have the power, and we have his authority, and we have weapons of our warfare. Just as a police officer has a bulletproof vest to protect him, we have the shield of faith. We have the helmet of salvation to protect our mind. We have the sword of the Spirit. Like he has a gun, we have the sword of the Spirit. We have literal weapons that are not carnal, but are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. So we have the weapons to enforce what he's asked us to do. Sadly, these things are not really talked about in church because they're too controversial. I've had pastors, one pastor in particular told me he will not preach the Great Commission using the book of Mark because it's too controversial. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I that's what my whole life's about anymore. And the thing is, it's not talked about, so people don't understand it. The other thing is, in the churches today that are lukewarm, they're not really getting spiritually attacked because they're no threat to the devil. He's probably leaving them alone because they're not a threat, and they're doing more harm than good because if they're not preaching salvation and getting people saved, they're going through the motions. And so they're not sharing this. And number one, if you are doing your best to follow God, if you really believe, you will be spiritually attacked. I've had friends and different people I've known over the years that as soon as they got saved, Satan threw temptation at them. And it's like, yeah, you just started your war on the right side now. So Satan's trying to attack you. But sadly, this isn't covered in the churches most of the time anymore.
Yeah.
Patrick, if you don't mind, I'd like to circle back for a second to the Amish.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If the listeners Google, say Amish witchcraft, they're going to find a movie that came out back in 2016 called Amish Witches, right? And one of the most interesting things there is basically they portrayed Amish people practicing a form of Wicca. And I think it's important for people to understand, and you could probably collaborate this, is the Amish are more closely related to performing what we would call the cunning folk, which is folk magic. This is not Wicca, because you go and you look at it, it says Wicca is basically this kind of its own little isolated religious thing that some people kind of go to get. But as you mentioned the Amish are they have their powwowers basically, and I think historically they were women. Not 100% sure if that's true anymore, but I think the most important takeaway is that this is cunning folk magic, and they're probably more closely related to theology than Wicca because they use the Bible. I mean, this is kind of a really weird twist of our sacred scriptures, of course, and I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is these are individuals who are using what we hold as the word of God in a twisted form. What would you say on that?
Yeah, they most definitely do. And they mix the scriptures that match what they want, and they reject the ones that don't. They absolutely do. It is like folk magic. That is like powwow. That's a very similar. And powwow is actually a mixture of old world witchcraft from where their ancestors came from, mixed with the witchcraft of the American Indians that they were their ancestors were in contact with when they came to America.
Right. Interesting.
So it's a mixture of two different kinds of witchcraft. And that is absolutely true.
Yeah, I tell
people. I was going to say, seems like they borrow pretty heavily from all sorts of things.
Yes. Yeah. And in all honesty, witches do that. Witches do that. If you get into what witches really do, have you ever heard of a book of shadows? A book of shadows is each witch has their book they come up with and they write it all out, and it is how the things they've come up with to work curses, a little bit of this, a little bit of that to work curses and charms and all these different things. And that's what a book of shadows is. years ago, someone I will not identify, but someone I'm a friend of, contacted me and said, one of my relatives, I found this book in her possession, and it's just really weird. And I said, she describes it a little bit, and I said, well, somebody taught your relative witchcraft. Your relative's a witch.
Right.
I said, that's called a book of shadows, 100%. And I said, but the problem is, who taught it to this person? Somebody taught her because she's schooled in witchcraft. And that's the thing. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, whatever. It's all about the intent. If the intent is to do this with the intent of getting something in the spirit realm for doing it, that's where the danger is. And they'll take all kinds of things and create their own spells, hexes, all kinds of things like that. And it's all about intent. And so they are very much into that. But the crazy part is you don't dabble too far into that before you know what you're doing, and you cross over into Satanism, because they know where their authority really comes from. And that's where all the power is in Satan, and from a worldly perspective. Obviously, we believe God's more powerful,
Right.
But they know. And that's when they start getting into the books of Moses, so they can learn how to conjure demons. And if you look at the video that's on YouTube for Nightmare in Holmes County, that was done after the first edition of the book, but there's things painted on the trees out there in that valley where they practice these things. And it like 666, there's we the burned, things, death spelled backwards. Well, why would they spell it backwards? Because that's what Aleister Crowley taught. Basically, God's a God of order. One of the things Aleister Crowley taught was do things backwards just so you're out of God's order. Any little thing he could come up with to be against God, he did, but he taught that. And there's obviously somebody out there was into Aleister Crowley,
Right,
because that's what they were doing. But in Holmes County, there was an individual who was very well known in witchcraft circles. His name was Raymond Buckland. He wrote 60-some witchcraft books published by Llewellyn Publishing. If you ever come in contact with somebody that, I'm an author and I was published by Llewellyn Publishing, they're a witch. They're into the occult, because Llewellyn Publishing is the largest publisher of occult books in the world, okay? So Raymond Buckland was celebrated in Wayne and Holmes County, especially Holmes County, and that's where he lived. And he was a well-known witch. The interesting part, if you go back into the 1970s, there was an individual who kind of came to the surface in a lot of churches, and it's very controversial because they're like, where does the fact and fiction blur here? Because he's saying things that are true, but then there's other things that didn't pan out. Guy's name was John Todd. He claimed his real name was Lance Collins. He was Collins was one of the 13 Illuminati bloodline families. And he claimed that he was brought up in this family and taught witchcraft growing up, and he was, heavily into this stuff. And then he became a Christian. He ended up disappearing. Nobody really knows what ever became of him. But one of the things to me, I was like, okay, the weird part is he's saying things that I know are true. Not everything, but there's certain things that I don't know how. He's clearly really a witch. He's clearly he was into these things. Because one of the things he said was that he was schooled in witchcraft as a teenager by a guy named Raymond Buckland. And then he talked about how his sister, who was a witch, they lived in Ohio, and she would conjure demons and cause UFO sightings in Ohio through the witchcraft she conjured. Okay. I can go into all of that. Believe me, I could write a third, like I said, I could write third editions of both books right now. There's so much I've learned since the time I was there that just completely supports what I'm saying in those books. But it's funny that John Todd referenced that guy clear back in the 70s. And then it turns out this is a real person. He really is into these things. And a friend of mine named Tom Dunn was closely associated with Russ Dizdar. And that's how I got to meet Tom. And Tom told me one time that he went to some event and Raymond Buckland was there, and he asked him point blank to his face, "You ever hear of John Todd?" Or I think he may have even used the real name. And he said he denied that he ever even knew him, but he said, I could tell he was lying.
Right.
And it's like, it is interesting how these things, you have that, there's a very strong satanic and witchcraft presence in Holmes County. And certainly with the Amish, they are, like you said, it's folk magic.
Yeah.
But at some point you start crossing over into the other, the much, it's all satanic,
Well,
it's
there's
all
no doubt
demonic,
that it's
but
esoteric and
they
occult.
actually will cross over into what is known as Satanism.
Yeah.
The other thing, I mean, it is well known that it is a very strong presence in Holmes County, but you mentioned Rumspringer, okay? That's where the Amish youth get to choose if they're going to join the Amish church or not, and they get to make that decision. And they get to go out and be rebellious, you know. Now, I've heard stories of these parties they throw when they're going through that, and they are full on conjuring up demons. I had a guy tell me, and this guy is a Christian. I changed his name in the book, but he helped build my house, and he's a strong Christian. I really like this individual. And he told me years later, we talked about all of it. And he said, I almost feel like when we built your house, we unearthed something that was there, and spiritually speaking. And I said, yeah, he was very on board with what I said about what we experienced there. But he told me that one time he attended a party when he was a teenager, and he was there with his sister. And it was all these Amish kids rebelling. And he said they had rock bands come in. They would have these huge parties out in fields, and it would go on for days. And he said this one guy was known as a conjurer, and that his sister's like, you got to see what he's going to do. Everybody's talking about it. And he said they had this big fire built, and they were playing all this rock music. And he said this guy called up demons, and he said it looked like two snakes that came up out of the fire. You could see them, but they were spiritual. And he said, and they would move back and forth to the music. He said it was crazy. And him and his sister were like, we're out of here. And they left. But he said, Pat, it's all true. He goes, it's all true. And he said, I saw it for myself. So here's the thing. When you go through Rumspringer and you rebel, okay, here's real life about that. You don't go open those doors. You don't go have, all these illicit sexual practices they engage in, and having sex with their relatives and everything else. You don't do that. And then, okay, I'm just going to go back and join the Amish church now. You open those doors, you got demons, and they're going to stay with you unless you want rid of them and somebody's willing to get rid of them. And when you go back into the Amish, if the Amish church was even really not into what I know they are, and they were just an old fashioned religion or whatever, like they want to believe, or they want people to believe. Okay, even if that was true, which it's not, you can't go open those doors in your teenage years and then go back and quote unquote join the church, and you don't have all those demons you brought into your life. You absolutely do. So that's the thing. It's like, on the surface, even some people will accept it. Yeah, I kind of get the folk magic thing, but it always is going to go much deeper than that. And that in and of itself is bad enough. But it goes very deep.
Well, Patrick, this is a question it's been rolling through my head for most of the podcast here. Now you've talked about the Amish. Are the Mennonites along the same vein, or are they different? They are.
They have more freedom as far as we're concerned. They can drive cars.
Right.
They'll dress a little bit more colorful, but they still wear the bonnets, things like that. They are still into a lot of those same things.
Okay.
Some of them aren't. There's people in Amish that are Mennonite. I lived in Kidron, Ohio for a while, and that's a Mennonite community. And that's in Wayne County. That's not Holmes County. Wayne County is more Christian. And there was a little church with a coffee shop, and me and my friends would go there, and we would play. We had a little Christian band, and we would play at the coffee shop. And it's a Christian church. There's a Christian school there, and they are Christians. So some of them are just straight up very modern, and they're Christians. But some of them really go back into the other side of everything.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering about that. Well, thank you, Patrick, so much for being on our show. Where can they get your details? Where can they find out about you if they want to learn more about all this kind of stuff?
Um, my books are on sale at Amazon.com, and they are in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook.
Do you have a website?
I don't have a website. You can contact me on Facebook. If you want to contact me, send a message and tell with a friend request. Tell me where you heard of me, whatever, because there's a lot of spam and a lot of bad stuff on Facebook.
And they can check out your podcast, Stranger Than Fiction.
Yes, my podcast is on Rumble and YouTube, and it's called the Stranger Than Fiction Podcast. You have to put Stranger Than Fiction Podcast as the whole title. And I cover a lot of controversial things. And a lot about spiritual warfare on there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for being on our show. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on
it. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.